you doing?
Hey, I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good.
Great.
So you've been talking about transport and multimodal transport.
Yeah.
So do you think it's something that's gonna evolve in Europe? I mean, do you think transport is gonna become multimodal as we?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. I think, though, that there's the data that is being used to deliver that kind of service is owned by institutions like governments and so on and so forth. And as a consequence, the change ratio or the speed of change is different than if you look at, for example, a consumer market, where you can say that the housing market is changing. Airbnb is just delivering a new service on top of it. So that's different when you have governmental data in place, so to speak.
In countries like Norway, I mean, you said you're Swedish and you live in Denmark. I mean, do you see that evolving faster in countries like Sweden or Denmark? I mean, like unlocking all this data and making that available for companies like us?
Yes, I think there's absolutely first of all a heritage in terms of public transportation in countries like Sweden and Denmark, and I think also in Norway, which is a good starting point, right? And then there's a lot of movement towards open data, which implies that a lot of more actors like your company could have access to that type of data and present that and build a layer on top of it, and also provide data yourself to that kind of database. But tell me more about your project.
What we're building is we're building a transport company based around ride sharing, right? So essentially it's a network between drivers and passengers. So drivers go on the website, and the driver would say, hey, I'm driving between, let's say, London and Manchester. Now I have 3 empty seats in my car. And any passenger could go on the website, look for trips, find this driver, and book a seat in the driver's car. So this way we created a sort of a pan-European transport network around ride sharing. But I guess what's interesting, and going back to what you said, is that essentially we're building a silo called ride sharing, and there is another silo called the train companies and the metro and the bus and so on and so on. And today we see lots of users that we want a service where they say, I want to go from this location in Paris to that location in Brussels. Just tell me all the options.
Yeah.
So tell me, I need to take the metro, then I take a BlaBla car, the other car is going to drop me off there, then I take a tram, and here I am. And it's going to cost me 60 euro, or option B. And today we'd love to do that, but we cannot do that because we don't have access to the train data, we don't have access to the metro data, and all of that is built in silos. And I was thinking, like, if there's one place as often in Europe where it could happen, it's probably the Nordics, right? Where people are A, using a lot of public transport, B, government are probably more willing to share that data. I guess it's a bit of a challenge in Germany or France, where the train companies used to be state-owned, used to be a monopoly, and it's pretty hard for these guys to actually share the data. And sometimes even they don't have the data.
No.
So sometimes that's the other issue.
It's true. I think that in Denmark and Sweden and Norway, we also have had previously state-owned transportation organizations. But although that's the fact, I think you're going to see more open data. And I think what could be interesting is to see what's the business the mechanism, so to speak, for you to deliver data as well as to get data out of it. Because today you can use APIs to get data out of it. And I think from a business strategy point of view, what we helped them with was also to see how can we actually create more value, not necessarily building a service ourselves, but providing data to other services like yourselves. Because I think you're right. If you look at the end user perspective, that is where kind of the need starts. And if you are able to deliver a service across multiple touch points and services, you'll have a much more interesting ecosystem.
And I think it's bound to change, right? Because if you look like 10 or 20 years ago, in countries like France, Germany, the UK was a bit different, but essentially you had one train company. So you knew that whatever you do, if you want to go from Paris to Lyon, for example, or from Berlin to Hamburg, it's called Deutsche Bahn, it's called SNCF, and you know that. It's changing already, right? I mean, today you have lots of aggregators, lots of different train companies using the rail system. You have companies like us, BlaBlaCar, you have others. So today, if you think of going from, like, let's take Paris to Brussels, wow, you could take the train, you could take the bus, you could take a BlaBlaCar, you could take lots of different options, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some really interesting in working towards a situation where you could have preferences. Say, I would like to go fast. I would like to go more social, going in a BlaBlaCar. I would like to go the most ecological way or sustainable way, and so on and so forth. But do you think are people getting in the way of you getting that data, or what is the barriers as you see it to realize that vision?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, in a way it's much easier for us. So we have an API. Yeah. So today, we could provide an API and we could tell you XYZ driver is leaving from Paris going to Brussels at that day with that car, with that preferences, with that rating and so on. So we have a very rich API we can share with partner. Why? Because we're born online actually.
Yeah.
So we are an online company.
Yeah.
If you think of like the bus companies or the train companies, we were not born online. So essentially the data, they probably have the data somewhere, but it's not organized the right way. It's not really readable through an API.
Yeah.
So I think purely from a technical challenge, it's actually not that easy to even extract the data from today's transport company. And then you have the fear of competition essentially, because if you do that, then essentially what you build, which to me it's going to happen anyway, by the way, but you're going to build like a meta search on top of all the transport companies that might be called Google, but maybe called something else, where essentially you're going to go through to find your trip between Berlin and Hamburg. And you might find the train, the bus, blah car, or something else. So today I think the incumbents, i.e. the train companies, maybe don't want to do that because they capture 90% of that market, right? So I think that's it's a technical reason, which maybe you know better than I do, and B, it's just going to take time before all the monopolies are really sort of broken. Yeah,
but also as a private company, I would say that if you had access to everyone's data and you are providing data to everyone else, what do you compete on, right? I mean, that puts a lot of stress on your kind of value proposition as well, because then, data is what you have to compete.
Yeah.
Don't you agree?
No, I agree, but I mean, for us, that's exactly what's interesting, right? Because as you see, essentially data more and more available and people having more and more access to information, in a way, what we're doing is we're building this, today it's a long-distance transport network that's super low cost. Why? Because we're just using seats in cars, right? So we're using something that's already there, and we're just like essentially unlocking that empty seats in a car, and we make that available for a passenger to book and travel with the driver at very low cost. So today for us, it's a real opportunity, because I think the more people think that they can use different type of transport, the more data is available to create this meta search. The more we're going to appear in this meta search, and the more people are going to use BlaBlaCar, and the more it's going to become mainstream actually. So for us, it's almost going in our direction. So we share our data. We'd like more people to share our data, because I think it could benefit us actually as a low cost, last minute social transport network.
Yeah. It's really interesting perspective.
So in a sense of, we launched BlaBlaCar in all kind of countries but the Nordics. And we haven't tried, so I wanted to hear your view on, would people do that, sharing a car, or like this ride-sharing concept? Would that work, you think, in the Nordics, or is it?
Well, it's always difficult to answer that type of question when you live off, doing research, right, or trying to help people. But my intuition would say that people are very open to both collaborative consumption as a trend, the sustainable part of it, the idea of actually, and you have the idea of carpooling to begin with. You actually have it parts of the Swedish infrastructure where you have outside of cities, you have parking lots for carpooling where people put their car and then they go into the city in a car, a shared car or something like that, right? So I think there's some tendencies, and there's clearly an interest in looking at it.
It's really interesting, because for us it's always been the challenge. The challenge was, in a way, we do a behavioral change. So we ask people to change their behavior and to say, I'm driving alone from A to B. Now I could actually share my ride. And in a way, you're asking people to change their behavior, to change the normal way of traveling. And the thing we had to face every time we launched a new country was like, essentially the perception of that's not going to work in that country because that. And whether it was like,
it's obviously difficult to answer the question, but I think that you could see there's tendencies in the Nordic countries towards this on many different levels, and especially if you also look at the ability to make money, right? Airbnb is being more and more interesting. If you could actually sell your seat, so to speak, and therefore have a more sustainable economy around your car, that would be an interesting aspect.
Yeah.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you.